I'm Sarah Lomax Jr. I'm the President and CEO of WURD, and we are really excited to be partnering with the Barnes Foundation to do this event, and we'll be doing several others here over the course of the year in partnership with their First Friday event. And it's really fortuitous because the First Friday artistic expression tonight is about gentrification, but it's a very different kind of conversation that will be had after this panel. So really hoping everyone will stay and participate in that experience as well. I am going to just give a couple of remarks, and then I'm going to ask Kathleen Green to come up from the Barnes and greet you. So we're really grateful to our sponsors, Moravia Health and PICO, for underwriting this event and a number of our other events. So thank you for that. And this issue of gentrification is actually very personal to me right now. I got a call not too long ago, and this is an issue that's come up a couple of times, about there's a mural of my father, Walter P. Lomax Jr., MD, who's this speaker series is named for. There's a mural in South Philly in Point Breeze, and somebody told me that a developer is about to build over it. And so we are trying to figure out what that means and what that looks like for us as a family, for my father's legacy. He was born and raised in South Philadelphia, and so we're trying to figure it out. But it's all part of what is the future of Black Philly. You know, what are the issues, the challenges, the opportunities, and we're going to wrestle with those questions tonight and for months to come as a radio station, as a community. And hopefully today will be kind of a first step in having solutions-based conversations around this very complex and very pressing issue. And so I'm going to ask Kathleen Green to come up from the Barnes, and then I'm going to bring the panel up. So welcome to Kathleen Green.
So thank you and good afternoon. I just wanted to say on behalf of the Barnes Foundation just how excited we are about this partnership with WURD. This is our second formal year of partnering, although we actually, I think it was our first year, 2012, where we actually did our first program together. So it took a little bit for us to get the stars aligned to have this being an ongoing partnership. So we're really excited to be able to welcome the WURD community into the foundation. We're excited about the brainstorming about a future programming that ties into different themes that Sarah's interested in addressing, and I hope to see all of you upstairs for the second set, which starts at 7:30. Thank you again for joining us this evening.
So without further ado, let me just say this, a note on just the structure of tonight's program. We are going to have the panel discussion, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And if you did not get one of these, you probably didn't get one of these index cards. And so we're going to ask audience members when it's time for the Q&A to write your question on an index card and hand it to someone who will be collecting them. And what's that? Oh, okay. Our moderator has asked if people could move to the front of the auditorium. So, you know, he's the boss tonight. In about 2 minutes, Eric is in charge. So, if people don't mind, it would be great to have a little bit more of an intimate kind of setting. So, but the questions, we definitely know that this is a very, very personal and passionate issue, and so we definitely want to make space and time for questions. And like I said, this will be an ongoing conversation, so we are also asking, we have a suggestion box out at the WURD table, and so as you leave, if you could write how you would like for us as a station to continue this conversation and to continue to wade into these issues. We would like your input and your guidance about how we can continue to serve our community around this issue. So, so if you can remember to do that, that would be great. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our panel to come up, and I'm not going to give their full bios. They actually have fuller bios than what is in this pamphlet. But I'm going to ask. Let's start with Tommy Joshua Caison. Tommy. Tommy is a grassroots community organizer and radical city planner, and he is the co-founder and executive director of the North Philly Peace Park. So welcome, Tommy Joshua Caison. And we also have Anne Fadullon, Caison, Fadullon, working my French. And Anne is the director. Anne is the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia. And Anne was kind enough to bring some materials that are going to be out on the WURD table as you leave, with resources around how we can, what the city has available to help people stay in their homes and to navigate some of the challenges that we'll be discussing today. Next is Dr. Mindy Thompson Fullilove. She's here with us from New York City, and she is a professor of urban policy and health at the New School. She is the author of several books, The House of Joshua, Meditations on Family and Place, Root Shock, How Tearing Up City Neighborhoods Hurts America and What We Can Do About It, and Urban Alchemy, Restoring Joy in America's Sorted Out Cities. So we're going to welcome Dr. Fullilove. And our fourth, last but not least, panelist is Angelo Perryman, and Angelo is the second-generation president and chief executive officer of Perryman Building and Construction Services. You can make your way up here however you want, brother. So we're really looking forward to his insights, and of course, the man, the myth, the legend, the person who feels so passionately and brings all of his insights, wisdom, radicalism to the airwaves every Friday from 1 to 4, our own brother Shamari, Eric Grimes. So welcome to our panel and our moderator. And with that, I'll hand it to them.
Greetings, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome. So what I want to do before we get started, on the count of 3, I'm going to count out 1, 2, 3, and I just want you to yell out the one word. Today is WURD Speaks, standing our ground, gentrification and the future of Black Philly. The one word that you're here for us to focus on today. The one word, on the count of 3, just as loud as you can so that people know we're here. 1, 2, 3. Equality. All right. I was hoping that everybody said gentrification. I'm glad you didn't. Because for the record, that's not why I'm here. And since I have this microphone, I'm going to dominate our conversation for the next 90 minutes. I'm focusing on the standing. Part of the belief that brings us together here is that when we learn and develop the way to stand our ground, gentrification can be any issue that we face. But that is the key. How do we stand in the context of gentrification? It can be mass incarceration. The issue can be homelessness or violence. But the key is the collective efficacy necessary for us to stand our ground. And I'm hoping that that's what we are able to pull out of this conversation today. Some ways that we develop the skill set, the tool set, and most importantly, the mindset around standing, given any issue that we're here to face. So let's get our conversation started. One of the things I want to do is make sure we're clear about what we're talking about. Gentrification. So I want each of you to kind of weigh in by way of introduction. Just gentrification, for you, what does it mean? How does it impact you either from a personal or professional perspective? And how major of an issue is it actually, particularly here in Philadelphia? Is this something that, we're just talking about it and it passes by? Or from your viewpoint, how big of an issue is this for the city of Philadelphia right now? So what I want to do is I'll just start at the end over there with the French pronunciation. Do I have permission just to call you Tommy, man, or do I have to go back to my 6 years of French?
That's fine, Brother Tommy.
All right, Brother Tommy. Let's start with you.
Okay, well, how's everybody doing? Okay, I would like to really thank WURD for holding this really important discussion. I'm honored to be on this platform with my colleagues. Gentrification, I would define it. I'm from North Philadelphia, born and raised. Gentrification is exploitation of black communities, it's oppression of black communities, and it's the continuation of policies meant to further oppress and dispossess African Americans. That's what gentrification is. Gentrification represents a particular form of tyranny, and it also represents a negation of democracy. So gentrification to me, at best, is very, very misguided policy. At worst, is a form of criminal conspiracy against African Americans, and is also a form of ethnic cleansing.
So from where you sit, who you are, how does it impact you, and how big of an issue is it for you?
Well, as a lifelong Philadelphian, somebody who loved this city, it negates a future for my people. So for me, it's a matter of life and death, because the very future, our very future, is threatened. You know, so that's what it means for me. It means that there's no future.
And? Yes. It should be
Sorry.
ready.
Oh, that works. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the city. So for me, gentrification, I think, is about who is benefiting from whatever is happening, right? So if we're looking at places where income is going up or people are moving in, who is that really benefiting? Because you know, for the city, in some ways, it's good that income goes up in a census tract, but not necessarily if it's not the people that have been in that census tract for a long time that is the reason why that income is going up, right? And then I think it also does have, definitely, there's something about race. And what is the racial makeup of that community, and how is it changing? And it has to do with who is coming in, and frankly, our minorities being displaced, right? So gentrification has to do with displacement. People that have been there a long time not either being able to stay or leaving. So for example, what I mean by that is when there was white flight from a lot of cities and a lot of minority population moved in, nobody called that gentrification, right? Right? But now as it's changing, so it's not necessarily just the racial composition changing, it's the people that have been there for a long time that don't have a choice, didn't have a choice to go other places because of a myriad of reasons, but now they don't have the choice to stay anymore, right? Because they're being pushed out. And so it's really about what is going on, and is that benefiting the people that have been there. It's sort of, when we talk about policies, I always talk about the next two words after anything have to be for whom, right? For whom.
So from where you sit, and remind people where you sit, how does it affect you, impact
So
you,
it
and
obviously,
how
yeah.
big of a deal is this in Philadelphia?
Right, and so I think in all honesty, in some communities, it's a big deal, and in other communities in Philadelphia, we really still have almost nothing going on. So it's, in some, we do have a lot of change happening, there's a lot of impact, there's a lot of development or different kind of businesses or different kind of folks moving in, and then in other communities, in other neighborhoods of the city, we still have either not much going on or people are moving out just because there is a lot of disinvestment there. So I think it really depends, but I do believe that as a city going forward, you know, we're going to experience more and more growth, and even in neighborhoods where it may not be occurring right now, it is something that we need to keep our eye on, because I think there's a lot of things about this city, some real basic fundamentals that means growth and change is probably going to continue.
Mr. Perryman, CEO, from where you sit, in your professional and maybe even personal perspective, what is gentrification? How does it impact you and your work, and how big of an issue is this in our city?
Well, you know, I'm kind of pretty grassroots. I come from a very small town, and for the most part, how our family business was started was by giving people a chance. So it was somewhat gratifying to see somebody that didn't have a chance get a chance to pick up an idea, join an industry that they never thought that they could be involved in. So as I see gentrification being as it is in Philadelphia, it almost seems like it's the taking of the wheel of a person to take the opportunity that may be right there in front of them. I can remember 10 years ago in 2008, when economic dollars were struggling to come to Philadelphia, there was a question of what do we do? And one of the first things that was being said is that we need to take advantage of the land that is open, ready to be developed, and we were trying to figure out how to do that. At that time, Philadelphia was being said to be 6% either abandoned or foreclosed property. But rather than us finding a way to get people to talk and come together, we did an open call for people just to come. And because you didn't have any regulations or guidelines or community input about that first step, it became then let's just let it go. And that let it go one time has become 20 times, it's become 50 times, and now people that really want to find a way to reinvest in their own communities and in Philadelphia as a whole are now struggling with how do I do that?
So just for my clarity, when I'm hearing you say it was a mismanaged opportunity, like if it was done the right way, particularly with participation and feedback on the front end, maybe it would have rolled out differently, but because it wasn't done that way on the front end, it's now problematic.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I was just...
Yes. It may be mismanaged by intention.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, you're looking at a declining city with so much open land that it was potentially a collapsed environment, which some people would say this might be the end. Maybe not the end, but it would be devastating to the economy, and it would lead the fourth largest city slipping to a level unthought of.
And Dr. Fullilove, I'm interested in your twist. Most of the people up here who are talking are either directly impacted or look at gentrification from a planning, policy, kind of economic perspective. Psychologically, talk about the impact on the psyche around being dispossessed from place and how an issue like gentrification is manifesting not just in local spaces here in Philadelphia or national spaces, but also internationally. Like, is this a big deal at a global level, or are these neighborhood-specific, myopic kind of concerns?
Thank you. So I'm a psychiatrist. I guess everybody's read the booklet, so that's why it's asked to be about the mental health. And I'm from New Jersey, so that's why it's asked to be global, because I don't really know Philadelphia, how acute the situation is here. But because I'm from New Jersey, I came down on the train, and so just sort of, how do you get welcome to Philadelphia? In the newsstand, there was this USA Today.
Wow.
It's sort of Black History Month special edition of USA Today, and it points out that 400 years ago, the African arrival in America, and this is the beginning of Black History Month. So the actual landing is on some date in August, late in August in Jamestown, but this year is 400 years, 1619 to 2019 is 400 years. And you can see my button, 400 years. And we have a project, 400 years of inequality. This is a moment to pause and think about all this history. And the reason for pausing, for saying we need to pause and think about this long process is, for me, partly spiritual and partly psychological. That anniversaries are not dictated by what we think the policy issue should be. Anniversaries are dictated by history. And so it's bigger than we are, this 400 years. But if we think about what that 400 years ago was, it was people being ripped from their homeland, put on a boat, and brought here with not asking their permission. And so here we are today talking about gentrification, which is the same thing. People being pushed out of their neighborhoods without their permission. And we have so many of these events. The picture on the front of this special issue is talking about the Great Migration, when that push-pull of people really needing to leave the South because of lynching and boll weevils and racism, and having the opportunity to come to Philadelphia and other American cities and get a job. So what does it mean, the 400 years? Because we can't understand the pain and the agony of this. People who came as part of that exodus came here and built great communities, and then watch the disinvestment wreck their communities, watch our renewal wreck their communities, that this heartbreak of this moment is on heartbreak on top of heartbreak on top of heartbreak. And so the pause to remember is also a pause to mourn, a pause to grieve, because it's only by mourning and grieving that we can appreciate what we have, what we lost, what we had, what we lost, what we have now, and we can commit ourselves to what Eric is calling us to do, which is somehow to stand. You know, that old spiritual, we shall not be moved. How do we get to the point where we shall not be moved? This is the deep question for our people in this country, and it's a very much a spiritual and psychological crisis for us.
And let us say amen. So I want to return a little bit to the development side of this, Angelo, and just take us through the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s of a development deal. Like what, all things being equal, and they're not, but for the sake of this conversation, what does that look like? Because we talk about developers and development. What does that look like from where you sit?
I'll try to do it brief. It is a long process.
That's the hope.
It's a long process. Initially, there's always a need in every community that someone is basically saying, as you heard with Councilman Johnson and Quinn Notice, is that there is a need in the community. So whether it's dry cleaners or anything larger than that. And there's an effort by a developer to say, I can respond to that need by the community. It's no thoughts about who it is. It's just a response of a need that the community is desiring. We go to a zoning board if the property is not zoned properly, and zoning will then either give it an okay with community involvement, which is where the community comes in. And I also add into this whole statement, a lot of what's necessary is the community to talk to itself. And many times the community sees something happening at the end of the block and doesn't think that it affects the other end of the block. And if that commonality of need is expressed throughout the community of how best to respond to the needs it's trying to fulfill, you will get a lot of your input heard. By the time it goes to the zoning board, in many cases, it's over. The developer then turns this into an economic model. That may be as simple as asking the bank, will you provide me the funds necessary? Will the state or the local government support it with grants or things of that sort? And then you're at L&I. L&I is only reviewing this process from the standpoint of it is correctly designed for construction. And from that standpoint, you're now in the building phase. And many times that's when the people in this room really get heard the most. But the boat has already left the dock at that point. And we have to have and you may have contractors that have a sensitivity, but in many ways you are not realizing that many of the construction professionals are locked in by way of the union guidelines, how many people they allow in, the businesses that are already pre-approved by organized labor. And now you're really limited as to the places where you can fit in, except as the end user.
Okay. So there's this mythology that gets said a lot in our city that nothing goes on in neighborhoods around development that a city council person hasn't at least had their eyeballs on. How close to true is that statement, just as a developer yourself?
Well, I'm not a developer, but
okay.
I'm a construction manager. So we oversee projects and we help owners deliver the result, as far as building is concerned. But in many cases, those have to be signed off at permit phase as well as the initial zoning by council.
So is it neglect that people aren't pulled into the process? Is it that people have been pulled into the process, but they didn't respond in the way that the channels are set up? Where's that disconnect between people who are saying, after a deal is done, hey, what's up with that? How come I wasn't included? How come I didn't know? And the process that got to that building. Where is the disconnect?
Well, I would basically keep it simple as if you know better, you do better. So with that kind of being said, there's usually a requirement that public notices are sent out. And what you find is that certain members of communities are the ones that respond. What I generally look to find out whenever there's an open informational question that's happening from a community, I really, strangely enough, I look across the room and I see how many age ranges there are. And many of the developers, people that are developing properties, look for the same thing. So there may be and what that means from saying to you, are there young people? Are they middle-aged? Are they young adults, young families? Are they senior citizens? Are they elderly? And they start making decisions about what they will push back on and what they will not push back on, because it's an economic model that they're trying to fulfill.
So according to everything I'm reading, I'm sitting next to the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia. So there are these monsters we call like the 2035 plan, the 2026, the Greater Philadelphia League, all of this kind of stuff. How much of that is under your auspices, and how do those agendas intersect with development that happens in places and spaces?
So I know Angelo very well. So the answer to that is all of it, to some extent, is under my purview. If it's development in the city, actual bricks and mortar, probably at some point it comes through, in some way, shape, or form, it comes through our office. So just very quickly, I oversee, the planning kind of functions, the planning commission, the historical commission, the art commission, which really is about public realm, and then a lot of the housing agencies that's not, except for the housing authority, the zoning board, which Angelo referred to, and then also we have something called development services, which is it's, as Angelo said, it's a very lengthy process to get through, and oftentimes different departments are requesting different things in conflict with each other, and our development services helps folks get through that process, whether it's a large developer, whether it's a small business, whether it's a nonprofit developer doing affordable housing. Oftentimes there's different agencies want different things, and that development services helps figure that out. So a lot of it's under my purview.
Okay, so
Dive in.
yeah, I have to. So we have all of these boogeymans. Boogeymen, I guess, would be the plural version of that. So we have the registered community organizations, right? We have the land bank. We have the actual value initiative that happened, right? That intersected with a wave of school closures. The 2035 plan, for many of us, driving a lot of that conversation. This is just the narrative. I want to know how all of that intersects and gets managed for the plan of the future for a city.
Sure.
And how come the people in this room that look like me feel like we had nothing to do with those plans? Mm-hmm. And then how we create a bridge such that everybody's saying that gentrification is an issue for them. But it sounds like you're in a position where if it really were an issue, it could be remedied or addressed in those spaces. Yeah. Now, I could be wrong. I'm just saying, I'm talking to the director.
That's fair.
Let me do that again.
That's
Director of Planning and Development.
Yes.
So I just want to understand, what I really want to understand before you even ask that, where and who is advocating for the best interests of black people in these mega monolithic processes? Like, where is our voice in that? Like, if you could be real honest, like,
Yep.
Who is standing up there at bat for black people in Philadelphia when all of these things are happening?
Okay. There's a lot in that. So I'm going to try to answer it without speaking for an hour. So the 2035 plan, for those of you who may not know, is the city's kind of 50,000-foot view of what we would like to have our city be in 2035. There's not a lot of real specifics in there about we would like to see this particular thing in this particular neighborhood. It's more things like we want public transit to work for everybody. We would like to have an efficient highway system. It's things like that, right? So that was done in 2010. And it was the first time, I want to say, in 50 or 60 years that the city had had an updated comprehensive plan that said, this is what we want our city to be in the future. And then what came next was what we call our district plan. So from that big plan, then the city was divided into 18 districts, and the process of the district plans began in 2010. The last district plan was just completed, I want to say, a few months ago, right? So we have all 18 district plans. Those probably brought that 50,000 foot plan down to about 10,000 feet. With each one of those district plans, there were a series of community meetings held. And so overall, within that process,
Just real quick,
time
so
out.
raise your hand if you attended any of those meetings. Just curious.
No, they weren't at the daytime, they were at
Regardless
night.
of whether,
They're all at
raise
night.
your hand
Every
if you
single one
actually
was at night.
attended one. So for the audience, I'm saying we got maybe 30%.
Yeah.
Would y'all agree with that?
Yes.
About 30 for, just
Right.
for the record, for people
So
listening.
throughout that whole process, 8 years, 18 plans, overall, all totaled, we had about 5,000 people. I would say our most recent community district plans probably had the highest number
West
of
Philly.
community, right, West Philly, Northwest, participation, because at that point, people started to know what these were, and they started to show up, and frankly, we started to get better at trying to figure out how to get the community out. That, and I'm going to stop there because that's an issue for us, right? It's an issue for us to try to figure out how do we reach more folks, and not even just in the Black community, but oh my gosh, it's one of the great things about Philadelphia is its diversity, but that also sometimes makes community engagement difficult because there must be 30 languages, right? So how do you figure out the language thing? Or if you get a notice that says City of Philadelphia on the envelope, how do you sort of get over the, oh my God, I don't want to open that, it's from the government. And kind of limited resources, so we don't necessarily always have the ability to go out and flyer, so we try to figure out who can be the community partners. But that is something that we're struggling with. And when there was a smaller group that I spoke with, who probably is why I ended up here, is we talked about how can we work with, community entities like WURD to help us get the word out about the kind of community interaction. The other thing that we have is something called the Citizens Planning Institute, which again, because of resources, we can only have classes, I think, of around 30. I think we're up to 300 plus what we call citizen planners that really explains these processes because they're complicated. I have members of my staff who are advanced degrees who have spent years on this, and we still come into a meeting and we debate over what the zoning code says, right? And it's complicated. And I just want to say one more thing really quickly. One of the other things is, so I have a bunch of housing agencies under my purview, and if you go in there, that's a very diverse staff. I have a bunch of other folks that I oversee, planning commission. You walk in there, it's not diverse at all. And one of the reasons it's not diverse is, for example, when I went to planning school, in order to be a planner, you had to get an undergrad degree and then a master's degree, and you came out and you made kind of a fair to middling income. So in order to have that choice, that career choice, first of all, you had to have some resources to get through that much education. And second of all, you had to have even additional resources to be able to make a career choice where after that much education, you made sort of a fair to middling income. Right? So what we've realized is we need more people that look like you guys in this profession. So we're going out, we're meeting with middle school groups, high school groups to explain why planning and development is a really great profession, and we're figuring out how do we get more diversity. And I can say, I'm going to toot my own horn for a second, because we were the first department in the city that really went after getting money in our budget to pay interns. Because that was another thing we realized, is that oftentimes an unpaid internship is just not a choice if you are coming from a certain type of population.
So I want to come back to you because I really want to know who's on our side. We had 2 Black mayors. We have a Caucasian mayor now. So we're talking about 18 years. We have all these people who are in roles, and yet when we look up and we look at gentrification in the city of Philadelphia, it seems that black communities are on the losing end of the bargain. And so I want to know where the disconnect is between all of the policy stuff that you direct around planning and those policy people who are black, and how black people end up losing in that equation. I need to understand that. I think, how many people need to understand that? Okay, I need your help in helping us. I'm gonna come back to it. I need your help in helping us understand.
I don't want to monopolize all
I know, but that's what we want to know. But I'm gonna come over here to my brother Tommy. What are the pain points for you as a person in North Philly? And how did your stand with the North Philadelphia Peace Park as one of those enough is enough stands evolve? Because I think that we're here to talk about standing our ground, and I think you all represent a model of standing your ground, at least on that little corner that you can stand your ground on. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, oh man, it's really heartbreaking, man, to have this conversation, and I'm pretty sure for African Americans here, because it's such a serious situation that we really couldn't qualify. Is the type of development that's happening in this city all at once, all simultaneous. It represents like a collective violation of human rights. And we feel like we're really being buried alive. And the reason why I mentioned it being a misguided policy is because you're going to have a new generation that's resentful, that's seeing what's going on right now. They're seeing their neighborhoods taken over. A clear message is being sent to them that their lives are not valued and that there's no place for them in the future. So I put the ball in our court, though, as black people, because pretty much while all this been going on, we've been pretty passive. And this is the number one thing that we must realize. We've been too passive, and we are allowing our communities to be destroyed. And it's not like our communities is being destroyed and then there's like an alternative. There's no plan B. There's no plan B. North Philly, these neighborhoods that we came up in, where we built that, are leaving our hands. And you don't have a plan B. You don't have a place to go. There's no new neighborhoods that's being built up for you. So it really makes me upset how black people has been sold out, has been left unprotected. You pay taxes just like anybody else in this city. In fact, you are the majority of the people in this city. But we can't even come to a meeting sometime and say black community, right? Sometimes we may want to bring up 30 languages, but you got 45, 50% of the population African American. So gentrification is an African American issue, is a continuation of genocidal approaches to us. So my whole thing is that the ball is in our court. Now with the North Philly Peace Park, how long are you going to wait for a system or people who have only abused you, have only bamboozled you, have only ripped you off, have only gave you false promises, have always put you at the bottom of the deck? This has been going on 400 years. So when do you black people, when do you in your own neighborhood start to value your life? When do you make your own plan? When do you make your own policy? In my opinion, the only thing that's lacking is our plan. Gentrification is other people moving while you sitting on your you-know-what. Right. So what we must do, we must stop pitting our faith in those who are not worthy to have faith in. That's ridiculous. We must put faith in ourselves. We must take this opportunity to do for ourselves. The way to combat gentrification here in Philly is for the black community to do for themselves. And in order for us to do that, we must have access to land, capital, and we must have this stifling harassment. When it comes to any time black people want to practice self-determination, we always attack. So that's just really my whole thing, black people. I feel like one of the things we're going to have to do, we got to stop being passive. We're going to have to come up with a proactive policy. The North Philly Peace Park believed that white supremacist development, which is gentrification, can only be combated by people, black people's development. We got to fight development with development. That's how we keep our neighborhoods. We develop businesses. We develop these vacant lots. We unify. Our lack of unity is the problem why we're getting our butt kicked here in Philadelphia.
Yeah, let the church say amen on that too. Dr. Fullilove, on that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I hear what he said, and my exposure to root shock and some of your writings said to me, and I'm a term what he said, collective efficacy, because I know that's a psychological kind of buzzword thing. And what I see you saying in root shock is that in many ways, forced dispossession undermines that sense of collective efficacy that black people have historically relied on in order to stand our ground. So in many ways, strategically, always looking up and being unsure about the place and the space where you affirm yourself and get your identity and love your neighbors and see yourself as a community is undermined by gentrification. As he's saying, that's the very thing we're going to need in order to fight gentrification. How do we reconcile that? Hopefully I did some justice to it, but how do we understand and get back to the collective efficacy when these dynamics around gentrification and attacks on place undermine it?
It's thank you. That was like, to me, that's the question. And I think the thing I would add to your excellent analysis is that people may look passive, but it's really a kind of social like shock and paralysis that comes from having your neighborhood snatched out from under you. But gentrification is not the beginning of this in Philadelphia. The classic study on destruction of housing, which called it a contagious process, was done here in Philadelphia, in North Philadelphia in the 1970s. And it was on housing abandonment and what happened. So if one house was abandoned, then other houses would be abandoned. So there were blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of houses that got abandoned and that burned down and displaced people. But that came on the heels of urban renewal. So my book, Root Shock, which looked at urban renewal, one of the case studies that I did was about the Eastwick neighborhood, which was one of the largest urban renewal projects in the United States. And I spent many, many hours and had the opportunity to visit Eastwick with David Jenkins, who was 11 years old when he was displaced from that neighborhood. One day we went to Eastwick to look at what had happened to that neighborhood, and then we went to where he used to live in West Philadelphia. And West Philadelphia was falling apart from disinvestment. So these repeated blows, it's not one, and part of what we saw in Eastwick were all the abandoned factories where the people used to live. So this was an excellent movie because it was not exactly explicit, but it did show you these things, this series of things, what we call serial forced displacement, that have repeatedly attacked the roots of the community and torn apart people's connections and left them in isolation. So you can say, well, you should get together, and people should get together, but after a trauma, people actually have the tendency, and if you've seen anybody who is traumatized by anything, they don't go join a group. They retreat. So what if you went through urban renewal, disinvestment, deindustrialization, and let us not forget the crack epidemic and the violence epidemic and the AIDS epidemic, which hit Philadelphia very hard, and coming out of that, we're coming into gentrification. Where is the energy? Where are the social bonds that used to exist in the 1950s? What happened to them? Not only have they been sundered, but they've been sundered repeatedly. How many people have you heard say, it's not worth trying, they'll just take it away from you again? So it's not proper, Brother Tom, I'm just going to push back on you a little bit. It's not proper to criticize people that they're standing still. This is a moment when the community and everybody who is a healer in the community has to say, what do I do to rebuild those bonds? If we don't take that seriously, we will not get out of this paralysis. And I just want to say that the man, so to speak, and use an old-fashioned term, practiced serial forced displacement on the Native Americans. And when he had perfected it, then he started to use it on us. So these are tried and true techniques to keep a community in paralysis. But this is about healing, and you've got to create some space for healing. One of the great tools of healing, some great tools of healing that have to be used in a period like this, drumming, meditation, mindfulness, singing, and the anniversary. This anniversary must be a tool that we use to call the community together, to talk about our history, to think about it, and to listen to the wise people. There are many wise people in the community who have thoughts about how do we heal. There has to be some healing in order for us to have the strength to make a turn towards a just society.
And I'm sure we're coming up to audience questions soon, but one of the things I want to also add to the healing toolkit is winning. I think I don't know. I just believe sometimes winning makes you believe again.
Yeah, but
so
and winning is important, but they can change the name of the game. So you can think you won. The civil rights movement, we won a lot, but then they did urban renewal. While the civil rights movement was going on, there were 993 American cities where 2,500 urban renewal projects were carried out, 2/3 of them in African-American neighborhoods. So while we were winning civil rights battles on the one hand, we were losing our neighborhoods on the other hand. So I don't want to disparage winning. It's like reparations. We could get reparations today, and how fast would they steal the money? So, right? They know how to steal money. They know how to steal land. They know how to steal houses. They know how to steal money. They know more about stealing money than we know about how to get money. So.
I'm with you. And so one of the things, and I want to come back to you.
I just got to say one last thing.
Okay.
This is the city of Rocky. So you know how in the Rocky movies, the formula is Rocky wins, then Rocky loses, then Rocky wins? That's life.
And we'll come back to you, because I think that, what you're saying resonates with one of the reasons I wanted you here, because I think that we have to raise the stakes of the conversation and really talk about the spiritual, psychological, and other impacts, the human level impacts of this thing, and resurrect the humanity underneath it all as a core thing to push back on. You know, the economics of it, the policy of it is real. But the soul of it is really, I think, what's been snatched away from us because of that serial trauma, and we got to get the soul back. So how do you all, because I've talked to you,
Right.
North Philadelphia Peace Park
Yes.
is not just a park on the corner. It's a soul-redeeming space that you all are
Yes.
trying to create. Talk a little bit about why that's important.
Right. Well, as Dr. Fullilove brilliantly broke down, we've been facing a succession of traumas, a succession of tragedies. Now, we're dealing with a situation where our people are totally dehumanized in a lot of ways in this society. We deny the most fundamental considerations. So a person like that has to go through an equally holistic experience. So one of our great leaders, Malcolm X, he said, land is the basis of. Y'all puzzle know that quote. He said, land is the basis of independence. Now, one thing about human beings, when you got people that's traumatized, one of the things is that our self-esteem is low. Our belief in our own self, our belief in our ability to achieve something. So what we do at the Peace Park is we call ourselves a land-based program. Because once you get our people out on that land, they are able to heal through being in charge of their own, picking up some tools. So the North Philly Peace Park program starts with the fact that what's good for our community is access to land, property, capital. That's what's good for our community. That's the only thing that we should accept as being a legitimate salve, so to speak, to these situations. So the North Philly Peace Park takes the position that in every neighborhood in this city, the solution is to open up the land for the people themselves to develop the land. All of this vacant land in our community can be used to develop urban farms that can feed our people. We can design our own schools and build them. We can develop economic structures. It also will increase our security. So this is the thing. We need self-determination as a community. And the North Philly Peace Park idea is that the vacant land within our community can be a basis for us to develop our own community. Because we're done with these top-down programs. We need bottom-up programs that we control that address our issues. Because the thing about it is this, folks, nobody loves us. So if people don't love you, how would they ever do right by you? If people don't love you, how would they think about you? If people don't love you, how would you come up on their agenda? You're not going to come up on their agenda. You're going to get the crumbs. You're going to get the late invitation. You understand what I'm saying? We have to unify. And I do want to push back on the question of passivity, though. I'm sorry, I got to give it to my people. My people have been passive. My people have been very, 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 very passive. I can say this as a person who lived here all my life and seen these changes, but I can also say it as one who is in the solutions. I'm at 22nd and Jefferson every day on land that we are developing for our community. But black folks is not necessarily rushing out there to pick up a tool with Brother Tommy. They're not necessarily rushing out there to come help me fight this economic war. So we have to step up, folks. It's simple as that. We have to step up, we're gonna have to unify, and we're gonna have to develop some policy on what is Black Philadelphia gonna do about this war that's being waged against our communities.
All right, thank you. In the space of real estate and development, are there answers, are there tools, are there stopgaps that the Black community could be using to gain some empowerment or protection of the spaces where we are right now?
I tend to look at that, it's a good question. I try to make things as simple as possible. Many times I think we look at 911 versus 411 in a system that requires communication. The Chamber of Commerce of Philadelphia has something that they call the Roadmap for Growth. And it was founded basically on having a lot of people with a lot of ideas that could be very positively used. And they didn't want to give 100 questions. They really wanted to give a solid 10 and present those issues to council so that they would have a clear message on what was needed for commerce. It is a simple, tried and true, easy way for community organizations to communicate to their ward leaders, who communicate to their council people, to carry a message that doesn't evolve once the development question starts happening. So it's a good place to start at something just that simple. I think you have to increase your numbers. The more numbers, the more that you're heard. So if something is happening on your block or on your multiples of block, the question you need to ask is how many people can we get here and make that comfortably communicate a message that we can say that this is the roadmap that we want to take for our community before anything ever gets thought about, because it's still a need for resources in every community across Philadelphia right now. It's a need. And there's nothing that says that there can't be a dry cleaner, a retail store, a clothing store. We actually did for the Pittman brothers, their effort to try to move clothing out into the community. They were very concerned, wanted to do something different than have a nice clothing store that would cater to black people, not just be in the center city, but wanted that to be out in the community. So it was a way to respond back.
So before I ask you, I want to go back to my question. Who's on our side? So I don't want to, and if it's nobody, say nobody, but I'm just curious, in all of these spaces and places where all of this willing and dealing is happening, and we see that willing and dealing evidently is happening, even in places where it shouldn't be happening, which is why people get indicted.
I'm not talking about that.
But I just wanted to throw it. But so, when that's happening, and I'm walking around looking at all these big people who tell me that they're the director of this and the chairman of that and this committee and that council person, and that, who's on our side? Why are we losing?
I think a lot of reasons why you're losing is some of the stuff that Tommy spoke about and also some of the stuff that Dr. Fullilove talked about, honestly. I think there has been this history of, this isn't a new thing, right? It's not a new thing that black people are being moved out or being being victimized, or, right? There's been a long history of that. Eastwick was the largest urban renewal project. Take a look at the history of Society Hill. take a look at what was really the history of the Vine Street Expressway, right? It was originally supposed to go down South Street. That was a historic kind of working class African American neighborhood that got all this disinvestment because it was rumored that that's where the Vine Street Expressway was going to go. And then, you know, it moved over to the area around Chinatown, but all the disinvestment already had happened. Model cities, what a great term for coming in and basically tearing down huge amounts of African American neighborhoods with the promise of they would be built back. Well, I can tell you when I did my first stint of the government, that was in the 90s, model cities was in the 50s and 60s, and we still had not built back. I mean, so it has been this long history, so there's an understanding why people feel a little bit like this. But at the same time, you guys really aren't the minority. You are the majority. You have the numbers. It's really a question of how do you turn the numbers into power.
Okay.
Right? Taking the numbers into power. And it really goes back to there has to be a united voice, right? What is it that you really want? And what is it that you're willing to work for to achieve? And I think that's unfortunately why, even though black people get into power, it's often, there's not still that united voice, there's not that collective power. And so, you know, do you have really, I mean, is there representation? Yes. Is it sort of 100% like grabbing the power, the collective power? No. And I think, you know, that's a larger issue because I really do think, again, getting back, we've really lost our way when it comes to community. Like, you know, even I did not grow up in a black community, but there was community. Like, we took care of each other, right? I mean, I grew up in the Midwest where you had things like barn raisings and everybody, you know, or potluck dinners, or, you know, somebody had trouble making the rent and you had like a Sunday cook, everybody bought a couple dollars and you kind of help people out. We have totally lost that. And I think that that's a key piece is somehow along the way, we forgot about taking care of each other. And it's all about, well, I got mine. Okay. On your own, I got mine, right? And we really have to get back to that sense of how do we get community, whether it's, you know, working on a garden or singing together or something. But it's not okay that we don't care about each other anymore.
So I want to go to questions. I'm trying to figure out the way we do that. I was told we had the cards. So could people pass the cards over to Sarah? Are you collecting the card? Or Josh over there, please raise your hand so that they'll know who to come to. I want to make sure I give you all time to get that. Before we do, though, if you had a chance to give us the inside tip in where you sit right now, like, you know, your colleagues aren't listening, you know, other people aren't listening, and you want to give us that one tip based on all that you know that's going on and being directed in the city about, you know, how we get a chance at winning, right? And, you know, don't want to fight about winning. What's the inside tip you would provide?
The inside tip I would provide is, you know, unite and come with something that's not, the reality is government's not going to take care of this, right? I mean, the government is not, you can't come and say, government, here's my problem, government, solve it for me. Because that's what's going on for decades. How's it working, right? How's it working? So it really has to be come together and come to government and say, this is our problem, this is how we're going to solve it. What is it that you can do to help assist us?
Let's give our panelists a hand before we go to questions. And I'm just going to move out the way. I'm just going to ask that you target the question to one person specifically, and we can get through as many as we can. And what we're going to do is we're going to type these up, the ones we don't get to. We're going to push them out through email and hope some people will, you know, take some time out and answer them. And then we as WURD Radio will figure out how we become a clear communication, information, and advocacy channel for you and this issue.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right. let me go here. Please acknowledge systemic, institutional, and structural racism. What demographic controls government? Oh, okay. Yes. Anne, please.
I mean, really, that's the honest answer. The honest answer is this demographic right here, at least the color of my face does, right? Butch lesbian does not. White does, yes. Again, we don't always have the numbers, but yeah, we have had the power for a very long time. The power is working for us. Why would we just willingly say, okay, we've had our chance, here you go?
Thank you for that honesty. I appreciate it. Because we in the delusion, we think the game is played a whole different way.
I mean, honestly, it's the same thing with women. Why do we think all of a sudden men are going to give up their power to us? Sorry, had to throw that in.
So there are a lot of questions for you, Anne.
I told Eric already that I will come back and just have a one-on-one if that's what's needed.
Okay, to Anne. Please explain why the PRA
Development Authority, yes, I know. what they
okay,
mean.
Land back, VRA policy is not transparent.
That we could just do a whole session on that. So I think again, that's sort of the great democratic compromise, right? Everybody gets something, nobody gets everything they want, and you kind of end up with this. That was the process is a very highly political process. That is something that sometimes you say, okay, we're going to try it that way, and you almost have to proof of concept or prove that the concept doesn't work. So I think we've gotten far enough in to prove to some extent that the process does not work. And so we are working on trying to clarify it, make it easier, more transparent, easier to understand, because again, we're going to be right up front. The more opaque it is and the more difficult it is, the easier it is to not give up any of that power. I hope I have a job on Monday.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. I just want to get to something that is moving. Yeah, that is moving quickly. Okay. Do the councilmen get compensated for allowing development into certain areas?
I'm not. So that the councilmen get paid, the council people get paid for being council people. I can't get into that.
I can answer for New Jersey.
Right.
Okay.
We're a state with lots of graft and corruption, and we call it pay to play. And then, sadly, our council people and our mayors go regularly to jail. So we certainly do it in New Jersey.
Our council people are going to jail too.
Thank you. Can tax abatement be eliminated for new high-income developments?
So, that's probably something that definitely is going to be debated in this next council session. The tax abatement, I believe, is around 18 years old, I think. I think that's about right. The city of Philadelphia was very different 18 years ago. Right? And I think, as some folks allude to, there was really just almost nothing going on in the city. In fact, when I did my first stint with the government, it was at the end of the Good administration. And as those folks who've been around here for a while know, that the city was literally on the verge of going bankrupt. And when I worked for the government at that time, you didn't know that you were going to get your paycheck every 2 weeks. It was always like, hope so. But the city was really struggling to do any kind of basic services, any kind of, and then we kind of came out of that a little bit, but we were kind of, again, not much was going on. And so the abatement was an idea of how do we attract development, kind of a little bit what Angelo talked about at the beginning that happened in 2008 when we went into the Great Recession, is when the abatement came around in the early 2000s, there was just not much happening here, and it was a really we're opening up the doors because we need to have something, because we can't support our schools, we can't support our police, we can't, do our streets, we're giving nothing to the neighborhoods. And so that was a policy, and if you looked at the, kind of all the statistics, the 10-year tax abatement hits and building permits go through the roof, right? So in that respect, it was a successful policy because we got things here, it grew our tax base, those kinds of things, but we're a much different city now. And I think it's time to have the conversation again and figure out that's a useful tool. How can we make it work to the best of its ability for all the residents of Philadelphia rather than just a few of the residents? So I think that's going to be something that's really going to be looked at.
Tommy, we're talking about gentrification and the future of Black Philadelphia. I'm wondering, with the word future, how are young people and young adults being brought into this work? And how would you suggest we have young people, since we're talking about the future, young Black people, young adults, youth, into this issue that's really about their future?
Right. Well, thank you for that question. The first thing we're going to have to overcome as a community is this generation gap. It's the number one thing that blocks us from coming together. The elders sometimes are scared of the young people. They look crazy. Right. Older people look at the young people as crazy. So this is what prevents young people from having that crucial cultural exchange that we need. Or maybe the other way around. Like in my neighborhood, I have a lot of brothers, a lot of elders who grew up post-World War II, so they're union. But it's difficult to get these elders to work with the young men in the neighborhoods. So the number one thing is that each one of us on both sides got to take one step up. So I challenge the elders here and the building today. Take one step closer to these young people. Take one step closer. Drop the judgment. Because I know they look crazy. You know what I'm saying? Right, from what you're looking at. But embrace them with a little bit more warmth, a little open arms, right? And for the young people, I would say seek out wisdom. Seek out the elders. Ask about history. Ask about how they was coming up. Ask for connections. So that's the way that we see in the neighborhood. We see young people getting more involved by making a better climate, or overall better climate. So I would say that let's overcome the generation gap, and that's actively work to repair the relationships inside our community.
I'd actually like to direct this next question to Dr. Fullilove and Mr. Perryman. What can we do now to create land-based economic development in our own communities?
That was a good one. Well, I think you just really had to go back to the basics. A lot of our educational background is really through mentorship, and as Tommy was saying, elders teaching the young how to be much more involved in what the good opportunities look like. Taking that just one step further is just how do we use it without them having to leave to take advantage of their true skills. And we see a lot of the millennials, as you call them, just finding other places where they can go and expand their wings. And that's going to be a real problem 10, 15 years from now, because we're now struggling with trying to get people interested in the economy as we have it. Meds, pharmaceutical, our construction industry is 400% in growth. So we're going to have to find a way to bind the young folks to understanding what's left here in Philadelphia that they can build their life on.
I think that you haven't talked too much about climate change, but certainly this week in New Jersey and the Midwest, right, where it was so incredibly cold and people were just dying from the cold, it's really in our face. And so I think that part of the issue is that the industries that have got us to this point actually can't take us into the future. We kind of live this life based on plastic, and then plastic that we end up throwing in the garbage. And there's too much garbage, right? And the plastic, it's our life is organized wrong across the whole nation, across the whole globe. And so really the issue is inventing the future which is a task that we all have to come together and do. I'm very impressed by John McKnight's concept of asset-based community development, just sort of finding out who's got what talents. But it's less about kind of the mega projects like the University of Pennsylvania eating the city, and more about what it talks about is finding the lady who makes the best beef patties and helping her develop her little business. Because it can't simply be about eds and meds and real estate and big buildings that consume lots of energy. We are going to have to find a new way to live. And we should do it before the apocalypse, I think.
Great. Okay, so one more question, and I'll let whoever wants to jump in take this. A large part of gentrification is the exploitation of the poor. How do poor people develop their communities when they have no wealth or capital?
Well, one of the things I think is really important is the Poor People's Campaign. And the Poor People's Campaign held a watch night service, which, so watch night was started on December 31st, 1862, which was, and what they were waiting for on the next day was the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So to me, as this watch night was waiting for this 400th anniversary, it was also particularly poignant. But what they said was that what they have laid out over the next year is that they will convene in June of 2020. And I think this gets back to your point about people have to know what they want. And this Poor People's Convention is about a platform. What do people need to survive? And I think that platform convention it's fundamental because it's got to be before the presidential election. What are the demands of poor and working people across the whole nation? What are the demands that we think politicians are going to have to live up to? So that it's not just about selling us out to the rich and selling us out to a corrupt and bankrupt way of living. How are we going to invent a future for all of us that's inclusive?
And you have to come together and then vote. Like, I know that kind of sounds pat, but really, every person, because there's nobody talking about poor people. No. Even the people at the national level that they talk about that are the extreme left, they are not talking about poor people. Nobody is. And so if you're coming together, vote or like and support somebody to be the ward leader and then this leader and then that leader. Like wherever it starts, because there is nobody anywhere talking about poor people.
Right. And look, radical problems need radical what? Okay. That's the key right there. I would suggest that we look at organizing our communities. Now, that's a good question. What can the people without power, how can they gain power? Now, the thing about power, power is not given from nobody. Power is something that you take. Power is something that you claim. First thing our community got to do is claim the power over our own thoughts, over our own bodies, right? Now, what do you do when our back is being pushed to the wall, and it's a question of really life or death? So I would really encourage the African American community to consider your history, consider your traditions. Your traditions have been freedom struggles. Your traditions have been organizing against tyranny. We are faced with a situation of tyranny. We are faced with a situation where our democratic rights have been robbed from us. We've been sold out by our politicians. And we've been left, hey, let's call it what it is. And it shouldn't be like excuses made up for it. We've been sold out. We are unprotected, bullied people because gentrification represents a form of civic bullying. You must seize your future. Ain't nobody giving you a future. Your future is your neighborhoods that have been destroyed. That's your future. Your future is you doing something for yourself. Do y'all see all the vacant land that's inside your neighborhoods? Do you know how much food can be grown to feed our people? Do you know how many jobs can be created from that food that's grown? How many products can be created? How many schools can we raise up? This is our future, folks, organizing. We need a citywide movement of African Americans against gentrification. We need to come together from the right to the left, in the middle, to discuss this issue as a people.
And on that note, we bring to a close this conversation for today. This is a long-term venture, and WURD is committed to being a communication, information, and advocacy platform as we stand our ground, gentrification and the future of Black Philadelphia. Again, let's give yourselves and our panelists a hand. And I turn it over to Sarah Lomax Reese to give us some final marching orders.
Let's give Eric Redishmari Woo! And I want to thank all of the panelists. This was a really powerful conversation. It was the beginning. I know we didn't answer everybody's questions, but as Eric said, we will continue to use the platforms of WURD, our digital platforms, our on-air platforms to continue these conversations, convene these kinds of gatherings, and to stand our ground. So thank you all so much. There's material, there's information out front, and please join the First Friday festivities upstairs. The second set, I think, starts at 7:30, and there's lots of great cultural food for our spirits that is upstairs. So thank you all for coming.